Hey friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rewind podcast. And we always know that it's going to be a great day when technology is on our side and Gabe is just like sharp and like ready to hit buttons and all the right buttons. And that's what's happened today so far.
Gabe pushing all the right buttons.
That's what I'm hearing.
I don't want to jinx it though. No pressure, Gabe. Welcome. My name is Blair Hicks. I am your host. Welcome to Pastor Derek and Pastor Andrew. Last time you were on, I called you Pastor Kirk.
Yeah.
And
I'm shorter.
It made no sense. There was no reason for me to call you Pastor Kirk.
People often mistake us for one
They look it's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, the personality styles,
Facial hair.
organization of our offices.
Love of spike ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the sarcasm is oozing out of the...
That's where we're starting today.
Yes. Always a good place to start with sarcasm. Welcome. I want to ask you both. Well, actually, I should say we are...
You welcome me.
I did. I said welcome, Pastor Derek.
So
Well, how
we
can we
started.
spend so much time on Andrew?
Well, because
Because
you're
I'm a
old
special
news.
guest. I'm a special guest still.
It's true.
Old
And
news. You can't have old news.
Old news. Well, here's
If
what...
it's not new, it's not news.
If it's not, ooh, touche. That was a mind-blowing statement there for a.
It's like, I wish if you aren't watching YouTube right now, I wish you could
Oh
see
my
Andrew's
goodness.
face because I get to see that face about 3 times a day.
When Derek says something, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, he knows what buttons to push to make your face do that.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
does.
Actually-
He really does.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite faces, so I
Yeah.
like to push that button.
It's a good face. Will you teach me how to push that button?
I would. I'm happy to teach you how
Okay.
to push buttons and turn people into living emojis.
Okay.
It's a unique skill set that you do possess. Absolutely.
You need to turn that face into a GIF somehow that you can send to people. Amazing.
Oh, I do. Actually, I do.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no. I'm concerned now.
I would be concerned if I was you, Andrew. Sunday School Unfiltered is our series that we are working our way through, and this was week 4, Feeding of the 5,000. But before we get into the good stuff, let's get to the really good stuff and talk about your pop-up service, Andrew,
Yeah.
in Brant. Where was it? Where did it actually pop up? And tell us a little bit more about it.
So we were in Paris, Ontario.
Okay.
So last time I was on the podcast, I was your community engagement pastor, and now I'm your Brant County site pastor. I'm a new
It's
man.
up on the screen too. I got it on our
Hey, look
YouTube
at
feed
this.
up on the screen.
There we go.
Yeah,
Was.
was.
I love that.
Identifying you.
See, Gabe doing all the right things.
I know.
Still.
The buttons.
Killing the game over there. So we were in Paris, Ontario at the Cowan Community Health Hub, which sounds like a
Okay.
weird place for a church service,
Health
but it was
hub.
beautiful. It was,
Spiritual health.
hey,
There we go.
Boom.
I like where you're at there.
Fully orbed
together.
health.
So they have a community
Holistic.
hall there that we were meeting in. We had tons of people. We had
Amazing.
a great team setting stuff up. Our worship team absolutely smashed it out of the park.
Amazing.
Preaching left a little bit to be desired, but there's no proof, so you can't. It wasn't recorded.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You weren't there, you missed it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was beautiful morning, gorgeous day. Ended with potluck, so it just felt like super good cohesion between our passage.
A
and
pot
potluck.
blessing.
A pot blessing.
That's right. I didn't grow up in church, so I didn't know that potluck was an illegal contraband term.
That's
I
amazing.
will never,
No.
ever say that. Just so you know.
Nor should you.
Nor should you. No, that sounds awesome. And
Yeah, unbelievable.
there was a lot of planning that went into that though.
Yeah.
And you were probably like how did you feel after? Were you like on a high, like woo?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Or
so
were
it-
you like I'm exhausted?
Yes.
All of the
All
above.
of the above. I went home. I was actually talking to Andy McDonald, who he led all of our setup and tear down teams.
Yeah.
And his daughter and my daughter are friends. And
Yeah.
Emma came over to our place afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, Emma said you crashed pretty hard.
Oh,
Because I went
man.
out onto the back deck and I opened up a book and I made it about a page and a half
Yes.
in and then went, it was gone
Yeah.
for 45 minutes.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And so apparently my daughter and Emma came over and were like, oh no,
Is he
Dad's gone.
dead?
They started
And the
poking him with
Yeah.
sticks.
And the report made it back to Andy. He was like, he was really out.
That's amazing. What a great place to nap, though.
Yeah, it's my back deck on a beautiful sunny Sunday
Love that.
afternoon. That's
After
feels
all
like
the
Sabbath.
stress was gone behind you.
Yeah, it was the whole idea is really to just give people a picture of what this could be, and what it could look like. And so we had a few people who were in key positions, but we don't have the teams built, and that's why we're not doing it again next week.
Okay.
But really a beautiful first step.
I love
in
that.
the right direction.
So encouraging.
That's the right feel.
Do you have info for up and coming? What's to come? Or is that like under the mat still? Like we're not going to talk about it?
Derek's wisely advised me to not give
Okay.
any dates
That's
on
good.
anything
No dates
that I'm
are
not
good.
legally
Until-
obligated.
Yeah, until things are settled. So keep up.
Yeah.
But Andrew can put you in touch with how you can stay posted on it.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
do
so you
that.
can, if you want to fill out our interest form
Yep.
for if anybody's interested in being a part of the launch team.
Yep.
So you can find that on the website. You can find my email, andrew@forwardchurch.ca. We're doing a bunch of stuff through the summer, really just trying to create the community, build the team. So we're doing a prayer walk on Tuesday tonight. If you listen to this right out of the
Yes.
gate, Larry, then you can meet us at 6:30 at Wincey Mills, and then we're going prayer walk one week. Family barbecue the next.
Love
Doing
that.
some teaching, talking through some stuff. Laura's going to be leading the next family barbecue, and she's awesome. So
Yeah. Not to be biased with your bias.
just the facts.
I can confirm she is awesome. Derek can also confirm.
I can. And if you just want to kind of stay up to date on what's going on,
Yep.
social media channels are up and going.
Yep.
So you can check
Awesome.
out
Insta, Facebook.
Yep.
So good. I was really excited to hear about how it went because I did see a picture and I was like, ooh, I can't wait to hear
it
more.
was, it was popping.
So that's so good. I'm so excited, and I'm so excited for what is to come. Derek, you were in Cambridge this
I
week.
was.
This today is going to be busy for you because one of our biggest fans, that doesn't sound right, Amanda Fuller.
Oh,
it is
yeah.
her birthday today.
It is.
Shout out to Amanda because I know she'll listen.
It is her birthday, my lovely wife's birthday.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And she is going to get
29
spoiled.
going on.
Oh, yeah.
29.
That was a
Going on
smooth
29.
move, Fuller. Smooth move.
Happy 29th birthday, baby.
Yeah, love that. Oh, man. She's going to give you a big hug when you get home, I'm sure of
You're
it.
such a nosy.
Listen, I don't care. I don't.
You're the
I don't-
teacher's pet. That's
I
what
do
you
not
are.
care about having that apply to me when it comes to my wife.
That's fair.
That's what you should be,
Yep.
is a brown noser. No, it was great. And you were in Cambridge this week.
And we are missing.
We had the most handsome pastor I've ever seen in my life at Kitchener.
Blair said she
Daryl?
just desperately wanted to go on a
Before-
date with him.
Before you email the elders board.
I mean, Steve will get it.
That's true. It was my husband, Steve Hicks, who actually was hoping, he was kind of like, it might be fun. I think I can make it work. And then we were on vacation actually.
Yeah.
And he got back to work on Monday.
A lot
and
of
he was
poop to clean up.
I am drowning. I cannot make it. So,
That was a plumber's joke, by the way.
Yes.
oh, he loves
a lot
those.
of poop to clean up.
Yeah, he loves that. He always
real
says,
backup.
how do you clean?
It's a
Yeah.
real backup.
He always says, how do you clean poop? Like, because
a
people
great
will say, like,
question.
oh, he cleans poop for a living. He's like, how do you clean poop? Like, you don't clean poop. I don't do that. So he'll probably say that to you, Derek.
Probably.
I'm excited about that
Just to
follow-up
say.
conversation.
It was lovely. It was great.
Listen, Steve Hicks is number one in the number two business.
How long
Are we
have you-
actually going to podcast today, or is this just
How long
Derek's hour?
How long have you been sitting on that one, Derek? You must have been sitting on that one for years. Years, I tell you. I'm not sure if I've heard that one before, so well done. That's points. Points right there. Steve's going to text you later, and it's going to be an angry text.
Gracious.
Okay.
I missed being here. I just want everybody to know that that is how I'm feeling.
I'm already exhausted, and we're only 9 minutes in. So let's try and turn it around before we lose all our listeners. And because Andrew, I didn't get to hear your message, so I didn't even get to make questions related to your message. So here's hoping you guys were
We're just going to talk about the passage.
We're going to talk
That's
about
a right
the
call.
passage. So why don't we start with an overview of your messages and the main takeaways? I heard yours, Derek, so I want to hear Andrew's. So let's start with you, Andrew.
Derek and I landed in a little bit of a different spot, or I'd say different emphasis. I really wanted to lean into the fact that Jesus was calling his disciples to serve past their own capacity. When you see the background of what's happened leading up to this miracle, you'll realize, man, like they would have been on absolute fumes and had nothing left in the tank. And then Jesus is like, you feed them.
Yeah.
And I think in a world where we really love our boundaries and self-care and those sorts of things, we can push back on the things that God's actually calling us to do because it's going to be difficult. And I wanted people to hear, just because it's difficult and maybe even seems impossible, that doesn't mean God's not asking you to step into that. I also said, sometimes Jesus calls us into something that's so ridiculous, he allows us to feel desperate because then it makes us dependent. Like if you're trying to feed, an arena's full of people with a kid's lunch, you're probably going to, like, it's not like you're just out of reach, right? It's not like if I just tried harder, I could get there. It's no.
This is a no-go.
No, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Unless God does it. And he actually uses his disciples to distribute, right? Like, and that's still the operating procedure, is that like he has ascended, sent his spirit, and then sent us to do that work. And then ultimately wanted to land on the fact that it's Jesus who satisfies, that when we give away what little we have and put it back in his hands, he then satisfies. Like it says, everyone ate and was satisfied, and then they had 12 baskets of leftovers. Right? So they gave away a little bit and ended up with much more.
I love that. And I kind of like it when because Steve also kind of landed differently as well. And I think it's cool when that happens because A, it makes for a cool podcast, and B, it just shows that there's so much.
Oh, I could have preached 5 messages out of this passage easily.
Totally.
That was my work on Thursday and Friday, freaking out. Anne Marie's like, "Can you send me your notes?" And I was like, "I have notes for 4 different messages. I don't know which one I'm going to preach."
That explains an app.
Yeah.
All right, Derek, will you give us an overview of your message?
Yeah, I really tried to get us to live in the shoes of the disciples and what Jesus was calling them to and asking of them in this, because as I shared on Sunday when I heard this story as a kid, as often happens, I identify with the character, but the character was actually character out of the passage in John, the only passage that he actually appears in this account, which is the story of the little boy.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're a little boy and there's a little boy in the story, you're like, "Hey, that's me." And that's, I think, not a bad thing. That I had Sunday school teachers who probably wanted to leverage that natural proclivity for us to lean into recognizing ourselves in the story. But then this story ultimately seemed to become about a story about sharing for me. And again, that's not a bad lesson to teach people to share, right? As I said on Sunday, I am pro sharing.
Yes.
Give 2 thumbs up to sharing. But now as as a grown man who is still learning what it means to walk in the way of following Jesus, putting myself into the shoes of those disciples who were there in light of what God was calling them to do, and in light of what they had been through, it was different for me. And so I talked about the fact that our call to obey Jesus is to obey him even when what he asks us to do seems crazy to us. That we have a call to obey Jesus even when we think we've come up with a better plan than Jesus has as a plan, and then that we're called to obey Jesus even when we maybe don't have it in us emotionally, physically. We just don't feel like it. And I think the reason that Jesus called them into this, because I really do think they were in the midst of feeling all these things, is because Jesus had some things that he wanted to teach them about him, right? He wanted to teach them because they were going to need to know that the impossible is possible with him, because they're about to, in not too long, get a command that says, you 12 uneducated nobodies, I want you to go out and make me known and make disciples of me in the entire world. They needed to have some things to root themselves back and to say, when Jesus calls us to do something, even when it seems impossible, it's possible. And then to know that no matter what happens, walking in obedience to Jesus, I can know that he will always satisfy, that he is my satisfaction, and there'll always be more than enough if I'm walking with him.
Oh man, I love that. It was I was gonna say you guys did great. I don't know if you did great, Andrew. Derek, you did great.
I believe.
C- for sure.
No, it was. I'm gonna enjoy where this is going.
And it wouldn't matter, man, because if Andrew
no
brought
proof.
5 loaves and 2 fishes for a meal for people to eat on Sunday, everybody would go home full if Jesus was at the center of it.
There we go.
And we did, because the potluck was absolutely banging.
There you go. We can just end it right here. Just kidding. I do though. I would love to know, since this is, I specifically like this question for this series because I know you didn't grow up in church, Andrew. But the rest of like Kirk and Daryl and Steve and Derek all did, and myself. So we've heard this story multiple times in different versions. So I'm curious to know what stood out to you most in your study or prep this week, or was there anything you wish you could have spent more time on in your message, being as though you've heard this story hundreds of times. Maybe.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, hit it.
Okay. I think for me, and I don't know how, like, maybe because I'm stupid, that I hadn't noticed this before, but I just really had not pieced together some of there's really 2 events that are going on coming out of this. So Jesus has some stuff going on where he's found out about John. And the disciples have some stuff going on because they've been out doing some really intense ministry that Jesus has sent them out on, and now they've come back. And just, I think, again, as you grow older, you experience more things. It allows you to live into a story a little bit more, knowing what it's like to minister as you walk through grief.
Yeah.
Knowing what it's like to minister when you have gone through a really intense season of ministry, you got nothing left in the tank. It just allowed me to be in that space with the disciples of having so much empathy for what they must have been emotionally going through. And again, a lot of what I'm hoping we'll do in this series, in my head, because I received these stories as a kid, they're kind of 2D stories.
Yeah.
They're cartoon stories to me. And the first time that you receive something and hear something, it kind of sticks there for a while unless you unstick it.
Yeah.
And this has been really helpful even for me in my own spiritual life to unstick these stories. And these are real people. This is like, it's not Aesop's fables. This was really happening. The disciples were really going through this. Wow, if Jesus was asking me to be like this, to go out and feed all these people when I'm done and exhausted, and I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Like, just thinking what my response would be.
Totally. And I agree as far as like, that's a good way to describe it. The 2D,
Yeah.
that's a good way to describe it. And part of that 2D is also the dialogue. Like when you're reading it, it's like, oh, then they said this.
Yeah.
And they said that. And as a kid, I'm like, that's all they said. When whereas,
That was totality. It was like a 2-second conversation.
yeah, da da da. And then it
You
was
feed
like,
them.
could you imagine what? Yeah.
Here's our fish and loaves.
Yeah. And it's like, could you imagine even what they were saying? And I know we don't speculate on them, which is fine, but like it makes you think like further than that. Like imagine what they were even saying to themselves or to each other.
Well, somebody said to me, what type of impact do you think that had? I said, well, I know it's enough of an impact that each of the 4 writers
Yeah.
commented on it, and it was that and the resurrection
Yeah,
that
those are
they
the only
all
two. Yeah.
brought to
Yeah.
the table, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
so it impacted on them deeply.
Yeah. And I think we've learned before through conversation, having these conversations that like repetition in scripture kind of means that, right? That it was very extra important kind of thing. Andrew, was there anything that stood out to you or that you wanted to spend more time on?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, there's this, Jesus is moved to compassion and starts healing the crowds, but Jesus does that on his own. And then he invites the disciples into answering this thing. And there's a distinction between these 2 sets of miracles. And the only distinction is the disciples don't get involved with the first one because he doesn't ask them to. And they get involved with the second one because he asks them to. And so I wanted to spend more time than I did on like, so how do you know what Jesus is calling you into? I give a little quick snapshot in like, the disciples bring the problem to Jesus, and usually when you notice a problem, that's God stirring something within you. That's not just like a sweet pastor move when it's like, oh, you've got this great idea.
Yeah.
You just signed up for it.
Yeah.
It's actually a responsible thing to do. If someone is having something stir up in them, then you're probably the one who's called to steward it. So that's one.
Yeah.
I would have loved to go into like, so how do you know God's calling you, and dig into that a little bit
Well,
more.
save that because that's one of our texted in questions. But it's okay. Keep going.
Secondarily, when Jesus, he says, bring the loaves to me. And then he instructs everybody to sit down. And it happens a little bit different in each account, but
Okay.
some of them will say like had them organize themselves in 50s and 100s and that sort of thing. And I wanted to lean into this idea that when we give something to Jesus, then we need to do it his way. That Jesus has a way of ordering the world. And sometimes I think you leaned way more into this than I did, Derek, that like, if we're going to follow Jesus, we need to actually live in his way. That we need to obey his commands. You can't try to fix your marriage in a way that runs against the design that God has created for marriage. You can't lead your kids to Jesus in a way that dishonors how Jesus calls you to care for your kids. And sort of living into that, but I couldn't spread myself in so many different directions.
Pick a lane, Andrew.
Yeah, it would have been an 85-minute message, and everyone would have been like, we should just cancel the brand.
Yeah. That was a taste, and it tasted like bad seaweed.
I was about to say I'd listen to it, Andrew. 85 minutes, I'd listen to it.
You would,
but
though.
then you were
You're a
like,
sermon junkie.
I am a little bit, aren't I? I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
There's worse things.
There's worse things.
Yeah.
There are worse things. No, I love that. I love that. And it's just that even hearing that it reveals more, that there's even more to this story. But this, you kind of opened the door to our text in question. We had a text in question, cue digital confetti. But it had to do with that obedience and submission that you were bringing up. So let's dive into that next. The obvious question that comes out of full obedience and submission to Jesus is, how do we know what Jesus is asking us to do? God's word has so many clear instructions, but how that looks on a day-to-day basis is not as easy to discern. How do we know we are being obedient versus just doing things we think Jesus would approve of?
You want me to start?
I'm letting you start because you were already going there.
Because I opened the door. So I would say start with the plain things. Like there are some things that are incredibly plain, not always easy, but easy to understand, right? The one I always go to is like, love your wife like Christ loves the church.
Yep. Period.
Yeah. Like that's,
If you're doing that, no matter how you're doing it,
yeah.
that's okay.
You're doing it.
You're in a good spot.
And I had a friend once ask me he's, the whole WWJD thing wasn't a complete failure. There's actually some, but the question isn't like, how would I live my life if I was a first century rabbi? The question is, if Jesus was a 38-year-old man with 4 children married to Laura, who's a pastor of a local church, how would he be? How would he live the life that he has given me? It's the Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ and no longer live, but it's Christ that lives in me. So how do I live that life of obedience to Jesus every day? And then also it's the Spirit. Like, so there's plain things in Scripture that are like, there's 10 that are like, just start there. Do those and then go into the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus expounds on those things. And then he says in the garden when he's talking to his disciples, and that it's repeated a few times between John 14 and John 16, like the Spirit is given to remind you of all I've said and guide you into all truth. So the Spirit of God reminds us of the teachings of Jesus and then will guide us. So don't quench the Spirit. So when God tells you to do something, you do it. So you're not quenching the Spirit of God, and then you grow in obedience. Do the plain things. Listen to the Spirit of God. Obey when you hear it, and then you will continue to grow in obedience to Jesus.
I like that. I like that answer.
And I would add to what Andrew said, just know that there are lots of areas that God gives us ability to walk in freedom. And like if he doesn't tell you, if he's not leading you by his Spirit, if he hasn't given you direction in his word, like if it falls within what is permissible by God, then enjoy the freedom that he gives you and live in that. What really matters is a posture of yes, right? Having a posture of yes to Jesus in whatever he calls you into is what matters. And I do think some people, again, Blair, this probably goes to some people who have grown up in certain types of churches, are living in like a constant fear that like, is this God's will for my life? Should I order the chicken or the fish? I want to make sure I get it right, because if I order the fish and there's no fish left for somebody else, then what's going to happen? It's like a butterfly effect and the whole world is going to fall apart, right?
No anxieties at all.
No, but like some of us kind of got this sort of, not I think intentionally, but unintentionally drilled into us, especially when we were in youth ministry and trying to ministers are trying, who oftentimes weren't much farther along than us in their own spiritual maturity.
As a retired youth pastor, I can confirm.
Trying to do what they could to like keep you safe.
Yeah.
And you start to get this like intense anxiety built up in you that like, if this thing isn't the thing that Jesus called me to do right now, then it's all going to fall apart. But sometimes God just gives us great freedom.
Yeah.
What if God is just really good?
You could do, you're like, should I do option A, B, or C, Jesus? And Jesus says, well, what would you like to do?
Yeah. Or yes.
Yeah.
Yes, one of those three,
Just
for sure.
one of them.
Doing that.
Yeah.
But then if he tells you no to A, B, or C, or all three, then your posture as a follower is to say, okay, well then I'm gonna then you show me what D is.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And your point, ending point there is what I was thinking of, was just the asking.
Yeah.
Because I know like this seems like such a cliche and easy write-off answer, but I think it's just so important when they're talking about like the day-to-day basis. It sounds silly, but just spend, like, I know this has worked for me. Just ask him in the morning, like ask him to, show you give him the day, give him your day, and ask him if there's something that you need to do today, that kind of thing. Because, if you ask him, he says he'll answer, and, we can just, as we grow closer to the Spirit, we can get better at discerning and hearing, right?
Yep.
So to say, oh, you should pray and ask sounds like a shrug off question or answer.
I do think there's an important role for community in this as well.
Okay.
People who
Community.
know us, love us, who we get to see whether God is at work in their lives. Again, I think this is really important in the age of the internet and the age of going to all sorts of people to ask questions who you don't know and who don't know you. You need to have people in your life who you actually get to live life on life with, who you can see up close and personal to see is the Spirit active and at work in them.
Yeah.
And then listen to them, go to them, allow them to pray alongside you in something, especially significant things. And take it into actually listen when it's said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't go searching for the answer until you find the answer you were searching for.
Yeah.
I
Reverend
just
Fuller.
see that happen all the time,
Yeah.
where I get individuals who come to me and I know that what they really want is they want me to tell them the thing that they want to hear.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're going to go to the next person. And sometimes that happens on a staff level. It's like 6 of us. We've all been asked the same question because they're just looking for the one person who will affirm them.
Yeah.
The best people to ask are the people who know you well and who you get to know.
Yeah.
I there's lots of great resources online. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of wonderful things online that we can learn. But I think going to spiritual leaders who you don't actually get to see what the fruit of their lives is really kind of a sketchy way to do it.
And I think the heart of the question here is like, there's stuff in the scriptures that's clear. How do I figure out, how do I flesh that out?
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to flesh that out in your life, talk to somebody who knows you, right? Like talk to somebody who's seen your life
and knows your blind spots.
Right. That's a huge part of, just having brothers and sisters in Christ who can go, hey, have you noticed this? Because I can see it over here. And then you go, oh, that looks terrible.
You see this. I mean, Andrew, I know you've been through this, but like when there's a couple who really shouldn't be together, right? And one of them is like just ignoring everybody around them who's saying, don't be with this person. It will be a disaster.
Yeah.
and they just ignore because they're like, they're not hearing what they want to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm certainly not a pastor, but I do work around ministry. And I feel like I've seen those people who do go to the 6 other people, ask for spiritual guidance, get the same answer, and still go do the
Right.
I've seen that story.
They
too.
leave and they go find somebody else.
Yeah.
or they got whatever. We could wrap each other.
Yeah.
We won't do that. No, I love that, and thank you to the listener who sent that in. It was it was a really good question, and one that I think many people had, because it's just really relatable. The words like maybe this is a different thing to poke at, but the feelings of condemnation and conviction were kind of coming to my mind when we were talking about sort of that discerning and you were talking about maybe God's calling you to something if you're stirred up by something. And that was making me think of like feeling convicted about something, but sometimes condemnation and conviction can get all stirred up.
Romans 8, right? Like there's therefore
Yes.
no condemnation for
Yes.
those who are in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
But also one of the things that the Spirit does,
Yeah.
it will guide you into all truth, and it will convict you concerning unrighteousness,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So like if we are living in sin,
Yes.
you will feel the twinge of the Spirit of God calling you out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And community, like good godly community, will also be a part of that process.
I love that.
And so, yeah, if you feel conviction, you should stop sinning.
And
So like I don't know what else to tell you.
And not run away from community, because I think
Right.
community. Listen, probably for the last 20 years, in ministry, I've just heard, community. What I find is all these people who talk about community, oftentimes they want community until it gets uncomfortable for them, until
Yeah.
someone tells them something they don't want to hear.
Right.
Right. If you want real community, you have to let people be real with you,
yeah, absolutely.
And you have to be real.
and you have to be real. You have to be real.
which takes humility. So, okay, no, I love that. And if you are looking for a community, text group to our text number 226-212-7117, because we have discipleship groups. Or you could text serve too, right? Can't they text serve to that, and then they'll get the serve to look how to serve, and then
Yeah.
they can serve in the
If
group.
if you get serve, if you text serve, you'll get opportunities available for you to enter
find
into serving and to serve within the context of
Yes.
the team.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So there's lots of opportunities there. Let's keep going with some more questions. I would like to know, is questioning God and asking or looking for clarity in his plan a sinful sign of distrust or disobedience?
No. Asking God questions, I think, is oftentimes just being honest with God. I think we see it all through Scripture. Individuals coming and like, God, why? Why is this going on? We've talked about this a bunch of times because Pastor Kirk has taught a lament class a couple different occasions.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that lamenting involves coming to God and being honest with our searching questions. God, why? The point is that it doesn't end in a position of challenging God and saying, well, like, you're not going to answer my questions. I'm going to do what I want.
Right.
Right.
You
ask questions, but the questions you ultimately have to land in a place of, God, I'm going to ask you these questions, but I'm going to trust you even though I don't get it.
Yeah, like it's your heart posture towards the
Exactly.
questions. Yeah.
You like all of us have kids, right? You've got questions from your kids at times, and you're like, oh, my son or daughter is curious about this reality and would like to know more.
Yeah.
And then you get questions and you're like, this punk kid. Like, right? They're just trying to push on things and be rebellious and
Right.
defy you underhandedly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's your kids. Mine are fine.
I'm sure. You got 4 times the possibility
That's
of
true.
that.
My kids are watching your kids right now.
This
so
is true.
I mean,
What have I done?
but yeah, it's a heart posture thing, right?
Yeah.
And if you are the person asking this question and you are asking the questions of God, really that's between you and the Lord. Like you can ask the same question with the exact same words with wildly different postures. And the results will probably be different because the Lord knows your heart and he wants to answer what you're really asking.
Yeah. Again, I totally agree that it boils down to, are you coming to going back to kids asking you questions, and Andrew has teenagers. He's fully entering into this realm
right.
now.
Yeah.
And now I have 3 and have
I have
walked in
none.
this a while. A question that comes basically as an excuse to say you're an idiot is very different than a legitimate question like I don't understand.
Right.
Yep.
And I even in the book of Job, I think we see Job get to this point. This is where God shows up and is being like,
Yeah.
Job, hey, let's reset here.
Yeah.
Let's remember
For
who
like-
you are, who I am.
For like an entire chapter.
For multiple
reset.
chapters,
Yeah.
right?
He really throws down.
Because the issue that had started to rise up, and the issue that starts to rise up, it can start to rise up on us as we're asking questions, is pride. We actually move from asking questions of God to accusing God.
Yeah.
That's where the problem comes
Yeah.
in. When you're accusing God through the venue of I'm asking questions of him, right? And I think that's where we just you have to know your heart and where you're at. But the great thing about God is he's gracious.
Yep.
Because even there, what does he do? He shows up to Job.
Right.
Yeah.
He still comes. He still meets him. And quite honestly, even asking questions in the wrong way is still better if you're asking questions of God than just walking away from him.
Yeah.
Sure, you're kind of acknowledging his I'm gonna mess up the word. So
Omniscience?
the
All-knowing?
fact that he's got everything under control.
Sovereignty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just checking to make sure I didn't misquote it. It was Mark 9 where the Father comes and says, like, I believe, Lord, but help my unbelief.
Fair.
And so if you're coming with that posture, no matter what the question is, man,
Yeah.
like God will respond in his kindness to you. But if you come with obstinance and rebellion, then he'll respond differently.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
But still out of love, I think.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
Like a good father.
like a good father is going to kind of like, okay, son.
Chin check
Well,
time, baby.
That's the thing.
Okay, daughter. Let's
Let's have it.
let's remember who's who here.
I love that. Well, going back to Job too, like, and how you said like he throws down, but like as you read on, it's like that's exactly what Job needed, and that's as much as it seemed like a throwdown, it was also like he needed that reminder of.
Yeah.
of
It's a
it.
reset. I
It's a
like how
reset.
Derek said
Yeah,
that.
it's a
I mean,
reset.
I talked in my message that like there's 2 things I think we see between the texts that really drive our disobedience to God. The one is that we struggle to actually believe that God knows better and knows more than us.
Yeah.
And the other is we struggle to believe that God truly is compassionate, loving, merciful God,
Yeah.
right? And what I love is if you take these passages and compile them, you see both of those attributes of God brought out in Jesus.
Yeah.
That he knows. He knows what he's about to do.
Yep.
He's not winging it. Well,
What now?
We're in a real pickle
said-
here, Philip. I don't know what we're going to do.
I told you guys to take care of it.
He's not shirking responsibility. Be like, I don't know, this is on you.
And also that I just love the fact that as he gets out of the boat, why does he even start into this? Because he has compassion.
Yeah.
Is that and so many times in the Gospels you just see this, the compassion of Jesus, even in his own depletedness in his humanity, he's still overwhelmed by his compassion for people who are in need.
I had to turn the boat around.
Yeah, I sometimes, I said sometimes God's going to come and like straighten us out. Sometimes God knows what we need most deeply is for him to come gently and just remind us once again, hey. Do you trust me that I know better than you? Do you believe that I love you, right? And through his spirit, he's going to kind of tenderly woo us. He knows when we need the stick and he knows when we need the warm embrace.
Yeah.
I wish I was as good of a parent
Yeah.
as the father is.
100%. I love that. So then, let's talk about his reaction to the crowd and his compassion that he had. Because, the question was, what does Jesus' reaction to the crowd that followed him reveal about him? But we kind of already landed there that he's compassionate. Does his reaction to the crowd reveal anything about us?
We need his compassion.
We need
Yeah,
his
I was going to say, what it reveals to me is that I'm not nearly as loving and
No.
compassionate as I
Yeah,
should
yeah.
be, because I'm looking and saying, what would Jesus do in a lot of situations in my life?
Yeah.
it ain't what Jesus would do.
But also
'Cause that's not my response. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm gassed.
Which we kind of see in the disciples, right? Because they're
Sure.
like, what the heck are
But
you?
even them, to give
Oh, yeah.
respect
Oh,
to
yeah.
the disciples, they're zonked.
Yeah.
They stay alongside Jesus the whole day when they thought they were getting away on a vacation. And I know, Andrew, you started by talking about this, right? You even maybe used the analogy for those who weren't.
Yeah, I was going to actually. I that was one of the things that hit the cutting room floor. But like setting the scene of like, you've had a crazy month. Everybody's everywhere. You're trying to get it away, and you go and you get a week at a cottage, and you show up, and then your boss comes out the front door, and then the staff filters out, and then that
You had a
kid.
nightmare about this?
And then the kid who always is asking you to buy things is walking up the driveway, and you just see all of these people, and they start to descend on you with their demands. Like I would have a borderline panic. I would like flip it into reverse and I'm out of there, right? But Jesus is moved to compassion and I talked about this a little bit at the front. Like Jesus sees people, whereas often when I'm in that spot, I see obstacles to my
Yes.
rest.
Yeah.
And he sees people, and the Mark version says harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, right?
Yeah.
So he goes to lovingly shepherd, which is my call. Sometimes I don't do that.
Yeah.
This, by the way, is not an argument for getting rid of all boundaries.
Right.
Oh.
Yes, and I did say that.
Yeah, this is not. This is an argument for God is sovereign
Yes.
over my response in all situations. I'm going to say yes to Jesus, but doesn't mean like, hey, nobody needs rest.
Yeah.
Because
Burnout is still real.
That's what they're going to do, right? They're
Right.
going to get away and rest. And then in verse 23, Jesus sends the disciples ahead
Yep.
and the crowds away and goes to a mountain to pray.
He sends them
Right.
out into a storm, but that's all.
We'll get to that story.
Yes.
No, I love that for sure. I like how you kind of said that God sees people and we see obstacles to our rest for sure.
Fair.
No, I think it's amazing I really liked that I don't know if you did, Andrew, but Derek, you kind of spent some time on that in your message about his compassion and we see and how you kind of just addressed like the burnout that they definitely had.
Yep.
And how you can kind of relate to that for sure. I think anybody above the age of 15 can relate to burnout, but
You're probably right.
all you 14-year-olds have it easy. Just kidding. One thing I do, and I didn't write this down, but I just keep thinking about it, is the significance of the leftovers. So we definitely touched on it, but there were kind of these multiple takes on the significance of the leftovers. You touched on one during your overview, Andrew, and I know you talked about it, Derek, and actually Steve kind of talked a bit about his take on the leftovers as well. What is your biggest takeaway of the leftovers and the significance of it? Because I think they might be different.
He is able to provide exceedingly and abundantly above what you can ask or imagine. That's the ultimate takeaway. Is there's some people who will try to analogize and be like, oh, the 12 baskets, 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
Or it could be the 12 disciples get more than they need, right? Like they didn't have anything and they end up after they give of themselves being satisfied and still having enough.
Yeah.
So God is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than you could ask or
I love that. Would you land there, Derek?
Yeah, I would. I think the key part there's a reason there's 12 baskets, and
Maybe you don't want to go down that rabbit trail.
I think there's imagery there
Okay.
around the 12 tribes and then the 12 disciples. But I think the bigger point. Remember, each of these gospels are written to specific audiences, right?
To make specific points.
To make specific points about who Jesus is to their audience, right? This is why we get different details sometimes in different accounts. So you have to ask who in each account is the primary audience that the gospel writer is writing to tell about Jesus. Matthew is obviously very much, his gospel is to show to Jewish people that Jesus is the promised Messiah. And so I think very much there's a messianic reality that he wants to point to here by numbering the 12. But I think for us who already believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the biggest takeaway is around the satisfaction. They all ate and were satisfied fully, so fully. Again, when there's leftovers, it means everybody's ate all they could eat.
Right.
Right? It wasn't like we just took enough so there was enough to go around.
Right.
It's like Jesus is more than enough. What he provides is more than enough.
I love that.
Yeah, that was one of the other things that hit the cutting room floor. Is I had a whole point of like the messianic reality of what's being displayed there. Like there's
There's Moses imagery of
Yeah.
Jesus being a better Moses, and
there's this reality of the messianic feast that is woven.
Yep.
Like even when he asks people to sit down, the word is really recline like you would at a feast. And so there's this reality woven through it that it's just pointing to Jesus as greater than Moses and the ultimate Messiah.
yeah.
Steve kind of talking to me. Not that he does it a lot, but I don't like listening to his messages before he preaches them. I think I just get nervous for him. Or I'll be like, oh, he said that better when he was talking to me. That delivery, right? So I had heard it for the first time too, but he was saying that he had to kind of pull himself back from like getting into that.
Oh, you can get into the weeds, man. There's a lot in that passage.
Oh, I love that. 45 minutes, time for another question. What about, this is like a practical question.
Sure.
Does the failure of what we believed God was calling us to do mean we misunderstood or misguided?
You got to unpack that for me.
Okay.
What do you mean by the failure of what God
Okay,
was calling us to?
so you talked a lot about, actually you were kind of talking about it in your overview, Andrew, was talking about what God might be asking us to do.
Yeah.
And usually, Derek, you were talking about how it might look completely impossible or it's almost ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's where he shows up, right?
Right.
But if we feel like we might be guided or called to do something that looks ridiculous
Okay.
and it fails,
Okay.
does that mean we misheard?
So I think the first thing we'd have to ask is, how do we measure success and failure?
I like that. Let's start
Right?
there.
Because I think oftentimes, even in the church, we really misread what it means to measure success and failure.
Well, but also when it comes to success and failure in a human way versus like what God is doing
Right.
ahead of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you follow this passage in John,
Yeah.
which I know is the passage that Steve preached out of in Kitchener.
Did you do John? Were you preaching?
I was out of Matthew.
Okay.
So if you follow along, he goes across the sea. People follow him because they want more bread. And he goes into kind of a dissertation on being the bread of life, right? And then he gets into the stuff that really kind of sets them off, which is, if you're going to have to eat my flesh
And drink my blood.
and drink my blood, right? And then it says, like, everybody basically left. They were gone.
Right.
The crowds left, and Jesus looked at his disciples and he's like, what about you guys? Are you guys going to leave too?
Yeah.
And that's when Peter looks at him and says, well, where would we go?
Yeah.
Right? You alone have the words of life. And from if we're applying a human lens on that in that moment, that is an epic fail for Jesus. You were drawing the big crowds, Jesus.
Yeah.
And now, like, you put your foot in your mouth, you said something offensive to everybody, and they left.
Yeah.
But God doesn't view things in the time frames
Right.
in which we view them.
Yeah.
God's ultimate measure of success is obedience and faithfulness,
I love that.
right? He doesn't say, well done, good and prosperous servant. He doesn't say, well done, good and famous servant.
Yeah.
He says, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what we want to hear from Jesus, because that's what success looks like in the kingdom as we follow the King.
Oh, I love that.
So he gets to determine ultimately what success is, because, again, we're working with a plan and we're working on his plan that we don't always get to see the end of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this oftentimes when it comes to things like evangelism.
Yeah.
You don't know what part of the chain you're going to be in somebody's life in them coming to know Jesus. We all would agree that ultimate success of the gospel is that somebody receives the gospel that's been preached and comes to Christ. That's a success, right? That's a win. But your portion in that may not be the final link in the chain that leads to it. But if that person comes to Christ at the end, that's a win. And I think so many things like that we are short-sighted in determining success and failure, and we use the wrong metrics to determine it.
Yeah. Makes me think of Kirk's favorite saying, let go and let God. Just kidding. He's going to text me later and be like, how dare you?
Sure. You're going to hear it on that one.
I absolutely love that. And it makes me think, and maybe you have additional thoughts, Andrew, but it makes me think of a conversation I had with the fantastically awesome Amanda Fuller. And she kind of had a story about that, about how it looked like her path crashed and burned.
Yep.
And then was like, man, I learned so much stuff through that absolutely needed to be learned before the next thing came.
Yep.
And I was like, well, yeah, that's really important for sure. And because initially it looked like a failed interpretation.
We literally, the cornerstone of our faith, the foundation of our faith, is an event that looked like the absolute abject failure.
Yeah.
Right? The Messiah being nailed to the cross.
Absolutely.
But the moment of failure was the moment of victory.
Yeah. I love that. The moment of failure was the moment of victory. Go back, rewind that, listen to it again. Do you have any thoughts to add to that, Andrew?
Hebrews 11. So you
Hebrews 11.
get the great hall of faith. It lists all these people, and then it says, I don't have any time to cover all these people who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight, received their dead back by resurrection. And then some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might raise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisoned. They were stoned, sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went around in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy.
Boom.
That what we consider failure is often faithfulness to Jesus in the face of opposition. And so when we get faced with situations that feel impossible for us to do in our own strength, our call is not to be successful, it's to be faithful.
Faith, obedience.
That's fine.
He's like, I have a meeting.
I'm not that excited, though.
Oh, I get excited. Go ahead, Gabe. Do you have your
I'm
mic?
more excited to have Gabe come on and speak.
Let's
on
go,
the podcast,
Gabe.
dude.
Well, he doesn't have his mic with him, so I'll have to
Oh,
do it
no.
now. So I'm going
Loud.
to... Okay, go. I'll repeat it. Go.
Was this miracle of feeding the 5,000 projected in the Old Test?
Was this miracle of feeding the 5,000 projected in the Old Testament or text?
It's TST.
Testament.
Oh, Testament. Ooh.
Was it projected?
I'm assuming like
prophesied.
prophet. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's where you'd land in all the messianic prophecy,
Yeah.
right? Like, so this was meant to show that Jesus was the promised Messiah who would ultimately bring. So it's a present reality. You look back at Moses' stuff, the manna in the wilderness,
Yeah.
you see that God's provision there. Again, it wasn't Moses who provided the manna.
Yeah.
And then you see the messianic prophecies. In the moment, Jesus is providing a glimmer that will shine ahead to point to the ultimate fulfillment of the messianic wedding supper of the Lamb, right? Where all will eat and be satisfied.
I would say
Isaiah
if you're looking for a verse that says the Messiah will come and take 5 loaves
Right.
and 2 fishes and feed thousands of people, that's not it. We're talking types, symbols, shadows.
Yeah. Isaiah 25 is the one that came up a few times in some of the commentaries in terms of like the closest direct tie.
Yeah.
I would say Isaiah 55 also, that you will come with no money and still be satisfied. Like there's some biblical prophetic imagery that points ahead to this, but even this event points ahead to a greater event of Jesus bringing a greater fulfillment. To that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ooh, I love that. Wow, you guys are quick on your toes today. Thanks to the person who sent it in a chat question. We love those. I will give you a last second here to leave any last thoughts or words of encouragement to your listeners. Take it away.
Yeah, I would just continue to encourage people, no matter what you're up against today, how you're feeling, whether the thing that Jesus seems to be asking you to do seems to Jesus.
I love that.
I heard somebody once say pretty recently, a rope tied to nothing provides no strength. But if your rope is tied to something solid, you can lean on that. So our faith isn't in our ability to overcome circumstances. We are tethered to the Rock of Ages, who will satisfy, who will be faithful to fulfill his promises to us. And so if he calls you, go, because it'll be good.
Oh man, I love that. You guys are always really good at that question. I want to keep going, but we can't. Next week.
You asked us to wrap up. This is
I did.
literally.
I know.
You can't ask
I
any
think
more
you-
questions.
You
at that
like
point.
absolutely drop the mic, and then Blair's like, "Let's go more."
I can do whatever I want, Derek. You're part of the
5
team
more
that
push-ups.
Put me in front of the microphone and gave this to me. So it's your own fault.
We closed our laptops. It's over.
All right,
Sorry,
fine. It's
Blair.
official. But I will tell you that next week is week 5, the testing of Abraham, Genesis 22, 1-19. Hey,
And we got 2 different messages going on next week.
Yeah, I'll be in
and-
Kitchener talking about Jonah.
ooh, my kids are going to be so excited. They really like that story.
Well, they've misheard it, and we'll talk about that.
Okay. All right. So should
So
I
I'm
put
doing the binding of Isaac and Abraham. Nothing like a little child sacrifice on a Sunday morning
Get you started.
to get you started. And
Love that.
And Andrew is doing the entire book of Jonah in one shot.
4 chapters, so you got
You can do
this.
it.
Don't
You
even
got
worry about
it. You got it. So does that mean we're podcasting next week?
You'll do Isaac next
Yeah.
week, and then I'm the week after on Jonah.
Yeah, but okay, we'll talk about that.
We're gonna do mine because we'll swap. So he's gonna be back over here the following week. But
Yeah.
we're just gonna do my podcast.
Okay, got it.
right.
Cool. I'm glad
Derek
we
needed
started
the whole
that out,
podcast to himself.
apparently.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I was hoping I could call us Team Blandrew because we were
But where am I fit in
Lyric.
there?
Exactly where
Well,
you
that's-
believe you should be.
Next time when you podcast with Andrew, it's Blandrew.
Blandrew. Okay.
All right.
I
It's
appreciate
2 weeks. We'll be back, Team Blandrew.
Thanks for tuning
Or
in.
and Dare.
I better close this off or we're going to be here all forever. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week. Bye.